Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about setting up conjugate templates for intermediate lifters. And because I've had a lot of people ask me, could someone who's an early intermediate, could they run this system? How would they find their weak points, everything else? And the funny thing is that for people who are not somewhat advanced yet, we don't need a lot of weak point training. We don't really need a lot in the way of weak point training because they don't have particularly true weak points yet. And if we were to run a conjugate type template, we could focus on just the most common, most likely weak points and the weak points that everyone tends to have at that point. All right, we could focus on the weak points that everyone tends to have. So what is it that I would probably throw in for those people? Well, we would do a lot of closed grip pressing, good mornings, and strict rows, right? Strict rowing. Now, I'm representing that with the Pendlay row with the axle bar bent all the way over. But we'll get into what we mean by other strict rowing and stuff too. But these are the supplemental lifts, that and probably a lot of face pulls, which again hits the upper back also. That would generally be fine. And a lot of people say, well, what do you mean? Is that everything? Yeah, that's complete development other than maybe the biceps. If you want to do some curls, you could throw some curls in or whatever. They're not essential. But I'd rather it be hammer type curls because that's going to be better for your bench pressing than supine curls. Right? And these are going to be the lifts that will most likely bring the most to the table if you just hammer these into the ground. So what will we be talking about? Well, we'd be talking about having 2 max effort days and 2 dynamic effort days. Obviously, the dynamic effort days, it would be speed bench. On the lower days, we would have speed box squats and speed sumo pulls. That's what we would do for those people. That's what they need for good overall development. That's what they need. And that's what we would probably do. All right, what about the bench day? Speed bench. And if they just followed that up with closed grip pressing and a lot of pulls for the upper and middle back, they'd be fine. Now, could they throw in some extra tricep work and bicep work? Sure. They probably don't need a large focus on it because they're covering a lot of what they need already with the speed bench and then the closed grip pressing. Okay, that would actually cover them. And when I say closed grip pressing, I'm talking about doing 10 sets a week, like 5 sets on both days. Same thing with the rowing. Same thing on the rowing. Doesn't have to be Pendlay rows on the bench days. Doesn't have to be Pendlay rows on the bench days. They could do inverted rows on the upper body days, and they could do Pendlay rows on the lower body days, but I do tons of it. I would rather see them do too much than too little. So when I say tons, we're talking about 5 sets both days. Be perfectly reasonable. Perfectly reasonable. All right, and we may not need much else on the lower body days besides rowing. On the speed days, depending on how much volume they do, you could probably do some good mornings. I would reserve good mornings for the max effort day to put tons of them in there. Minimum of 5 sets. Some guys can get away with more, especially if we're not doing much else. Especially if we're not doing much else. And what we do for the other days, well, whatever you have available. That's the thing when it comes to conjugate. You have to work with what you have. Right? You have to work with what you have. We want the largest variety possible with the different max effort lifts. I'll venture to say that the majority of people, including people with home gyms, don't have multiple specialty bars. They don't have bands. They don't have chains. In fact, I would go so far as to say that people with a home gym with none of that stuff might need a bench block just to have different bench presses. They could do different board presses for maxes. Because otherwise you're going to run out of lifts real quick. But would you really do pin presses in your rack? wide grip bench, close grip bench, wide grip floor press, close grip floor press, pen presses, however many pen presses you can come up with. All right, you can do all that to maxes. But once you do those, tons of close grip pressing and rowing. Tons of close grip pressing and rowing. And most guys would get pretty strong. Like I would venture to say that most guys doing something like that could probably get reasonably close to my strength standards that I put out there. Reasonably close to those. What do we mean? They can get close to 400 squat, 500 deadlift doing that. I'm not saying they can't add some extra supplemental work in, but they still need to focus on the basics. And those are the basics. And what do we do for max effort days? Well, whatever you have available. Rotate between a squat and a deadlift of some type. All right, rotate between a squat and a deadlift of some type. What do you mean squats? Well, you're going to have a box squat obviously in there. Depending on what you have for structure, multiple heights of box squats. You can have a back squat. You have a dead pen squat. All right, you squat off of pins. That's if you have no specialty bars, no bands, no chains. You probably come up with at least 2 heights of box squats. So we've got at least 4 different squats. Same thing with deadlifts. You got conventional, you got sumo. All right, might be hard to come up with anything else if you don't have anything to change blocks. If you don't have any way to change blocks or deficits in any way, it could be hard to do, but most guys can still do a deficit. You got a plate you can stand on. You can do deficits on either one. Do deficits on either one. Totally fine. And then what would you do afterwards? Tons of good mornings. Tons of good mornings. And then rows. And most of your lower body hypertrophy is going to come from that and the speed days. You get people say like, well, there's not enough quad work. Really? Why not? Tell me if you're doing correct deep speed boxes and you're doing sumo pulls for speed, telling me there's not enough quad work? That's just as much quad work as the average bro bodybuilder's leg day, plus whatever stimulation you're getting off the max day. And you could find a way to drag or sled or do some step-ups if you were really worried about it. But here's what I'm going to say. Weak quads is not preventing the majority of lifters from getting a 400 squat. Okay? It's not. They don't generally need quad specialization to get there. They don't need quad specialization to get there. They need glute, hamstring, hip, erectors. That's usually where they're deficient. And we're still getting quad hypertrophy there. Your quads are still going to grow doing that. Okay. But what is it that we're addressing? We're addressing all those other weak points with the good mornings. Well, what's going to build their deadlift up? Well, the fact that they're box squatting, doing strict rows, doing good mornings. That'll build your deadlift. That'll build your deadlift. Same thing, we come over to the bench. Where's our weak link usually? Well, just general pressing strength. Upper back. Frequent weak links for guys who can't bench. All the rows and face pulls are doing inverted rows and whatever we need to do. It builds the upper back. General pressing strength. Well, besides the fact that we're rotating through max lifts and we have the speed day, a lot of our hypertrophy. Close grip pressing, though, will build a lot of the rest. It's very high stimulus to fatigue ratio. Long range of motion. All right, builds the pecs and the triceps. This isn't that difficult. It's very doable. And just run a standard conjugate template using the equipment you have. That would push most people all the way up to being an advanced lifter if they were to be careful about it. It could work. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.